Hi guys, so Boris Johnson was at a vaccine laboratory in Scotland yesterday as part of his pro-union campaign. Now, he was asked by Sky News about a second referendum for Scotland, and he dismissed it as completely irrelevant to the Scottish public. Now, this is a new approach. There was the idea of, well, you know, they had one a few years ago. It was part of this idea of once in a generation, and the Scots are not really concerned about that. Now it's moved on to, well, you know, it's not relevant to the Scottish people. They're more interested in focusing on the pandemic, which is, of course, ironic because, you know, there was an opportunity to focus mainly on the pandemic last year at the very beginning and park Brexit. But of course, Boris Johnson didn't want to do that. He wanted to push ahead fighting the pandemic and dealing with Brexit, and of course both have turned out to be a disaster. But let's hear what he had to say about Scottish independence.
I think you're going on and on about a referendum, and we don't actually know what that referendum would set out to achieve. We don't know what the point of it would be, what happens to the army, what happens to the crown, what happens to the pound, what happens to the foreign office, what happens to the security. Nobody will tell us what it
Isn't this ironic? Isn't it incredibly ironic that Boris Johnson is saying, you know, when we ask the Scots, what's going to happen with the crown? What's going to happen to our money? All of these questions were asked of Boris Johnson before the Brexit referendum, and his response was, stop asking these questions. Or his response was, stop engaging in Project Fear. Or his response was, everything is going to be great. You've nothing to be worried about. Don't worry. Only a lunatic, only a crazy person would think that we would be outside the single market and the customs union. We can be outside we can be no longer a member, but have all the benefits of being a member. We'll be Nigel Farage, another one who said, we'll be like Switzerland. We'll be like Norway. Now, when Boris Johnson and other Brexiteers promised that everything would be great, and now things are not great, they're the opposite, it's an absolute disaster, were they lying or did they not know? Because now Boris Johnson is trying to tell people, well, look, you shouldn't trust the SNP or the independence movement in Scotland because they're not answering these questions, although they have answered these questions. They have presented responses to these issues of the crown, the money, the army. But Boris Johnson is trying to say, look, we don't know, so we shouldn't vote. Boris Johnson, the same guy who was saying everything is going to be great when we leave the European Union, has been proven wrong, and now we should trust him in some way?
It's all meant to be about.
But if people want it, shouldn't they have it?
And they had one in 2014. I have to
They had one in 2014. Once again, you lied to the people of Scotland. You and the main parties in England, in Westminster, I should say, lied to the people of Scotland. You said you need to vote to remain in the UK in order to stay in the European Union, and then you basically threw them under a bus 2 years later. Yes, they had their referendum. Yeah, but they were conned. They were tricked by people like you, and you want them to be dragged out. Well, they've already been dragged out of the European Union. You don't want, you've already punished them, and you want to punish them again.
I think endless talk about a referendum without any clear description of what the constitutional situation will be after that referendum is completely irrelevant now to the concerns of most people who I think want us to beat this pandemic.
Okay, so he's moved on from, look, they had their vote back in 2014. It was once in a generation vote. They've moved on from that to say, look, people just want to focus on the pandemic. People are not interested in this referendum. Either he's stupid or he doesn't understand. But one part of the motivation to become independent is because of how Nicola Sturgeon's government has dealt with the pandemic. You know, if the pandemic had not taken place, perhaps there would be less support for the pandemic, or for independence, sorry, not the pandemic, for independence. Boris Johnson has helped independence by his mishandling of the pandemic, of how to deal with it. So Boris Johnson can't really say, look, the Scottish people are only, they want us to focus on the pandemic. They definitely don't want you to focus on it because you're a disaster when it comes to it. Take it on the chin. We're not going into lockdowns and then 2 weeks later going into a lockdown. We're going to follow the science. No, we're actually going to not follow the science. We're going to follow the politicians. We're going to follow the public opinion. We're going to focus our approach on dealing with this pandemic according to public opinion, not scientific opinion. I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I'm of course going over old ground here, but if Boris Johnson truly believes the union is strong, then he would be the first calling for a referendum to put this issue to bed. He's not, because he's afraid. He understands that the union is not strong, and surely he or people around him would be telling him, Boris, keep your bloody mouth shut, because the more you talk about it, the worse you make it for the union. He can't get away with, this idea that every time he goes to Scotland, he's promoting the union. Send someone else if you want. I don't know who. Jacob Rees-Mogg probably wouldn't be a good choice either. But every time Boris Johnson goes, support for independence increases. Now, he either doesn't understand that or he doesn't care. I'm starting to believe that Boris Johnson actually wants to destroy the union. Look at what happened with Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is moving further and further away from the UK, from Britain. It's eventually going to become part of the Republic of Ireland. There will be a united Ireland. And Boris Johnson has helped push that along. I've said before on live streams or whatever, Boris Johnson has done more for a united Ireland than Sinn Féin has achieved in 100 years. Boris Johnson is a fantastic candidate, or sorry, a fantastic campaigner for Scottish independence. Every time he opens his mouth, more and more people move. People who are generally supportive of the union are getting sick and tired of Boris Johnson and the Tories. Defending the union is getting weak, is getting more and more difficult. And other commentators have said, something that's very important is, people who are passionate about something will come out and vote. People who are not passionate will not bother to come out and vote. So if there is a referendum, if the SNP win a majority in May and they hold a referendum, if I was the SNP, I'd hold it as soon as possible. I wouldn't let it, drag on until next year or the year after. I would hold it immediately. And it would probably win. I'm not guaranteeing it, but it would probably win because supporters of independence are passionate. Supporters of the union, what have they got? They got Boris Johnson. They got Nigel Farage. They got George Galloway. They got Jacob Rees-Mogg. These are the examples they have to promote the union. Maybe Tony Blair or Gordon Brown as well. Not exactly popular people in Scotland. So I think Boris Johnson is going to make another few trips to Scotland, and if I was the SNP, I'd be extremely happy. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?